double hello.
Well, triple hello, maybe.
Triple. Oh, yeah. Well, I meant the Syrian double hello. We go hello, hello, with that very high pitch. Hello, hello. It's more like aloe than hello.
Yeah, I mean, it's actually very surprising when you look at some of the terminology that we use and how much of it comes from French.
Yeah, Syrian. Yeah,
yeah, and not just Syrian. The entire region actually has been
really?
affected so much by French. We say
More
so
so than English.
Yeah, I would say more than English because you have to remember that Britain's effect was more in terms of a mandate, supposedly, compared to what the French actually did. They were more invasive in their presence.
Interesting. You used the word invasive, and you're giving it a negative connotation when you're saying that.
Not necessarily. I mean, if you go to the region, it's very hard to find anyone who's going to be speaking positively of the colonial era. And yet,
go ahead, finish your saying, and then I want to contradict you.
But if you compare, for example, a place like India, India had so many positive things on top of the really negative things that happened because of colonialism. That they owe to the presence of foreigners essentially running the country. Same thing can be said about Muslim majority countries, but of course, pride prevents them from even looking and
Well,
seeing.
in my family, my mom told me, and she's getting information from her mom, and their consensus is what the French did in Syria was good for Syria. Things like opening up schools, and we got to explain to people what they were coming off from, which is the Ottoman Empire.
Yes.
And the way the Ottomans treated the Arab countries.
Yeah.
I think they were using Islam to control people, and I know a lot of people do that anyway. But I think because it's a different ethnic group, they were treating Turkish people differently than they treated the Arabs.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean. In all aspects of life, you can think of the Ottoman Empire, especially during that last period, as a kind of a leftover feudal system that should basically belong to the Middle Ages, where you have the nobility.
That's how they were functioning still. Yes.
Yeah,
like the Middle Ages,
ruling over a serfdom essentially, instead of having an actual citizenry that.
Yeah, and I heard things like the whole concept of wearing. Maybe this is bullshit. Maybe this is propaganda. I don't know. The whole concept of like wearing the full tent, black tent, which isn't in Islam, to be clear. They said they can't. That started during the Ottoman Empire, and the Ottomans were doing it. Pushing for it or whatever. I don't know if that's true.
I cannot say for sure. I mean, I know for a fact that veiling in general and the meticulousness of hiding hair particularly well, making sure that not a strand of hair is shown, is something that's relatively recent. Even if you go to some rural areas today, you would find that they might have a kind of a veil, but it's a kind of a more traditional wearing of headdress than a religious veil. So I think there's something to it, but I cannot say for sure.
Well, just in general, I think the Ottomans were, trying to push the Arabs down. And I mean, like when it comes to education too, that's like a main way to do that, like closing schools or whatever, or making it hard.
There was hardly any kind of education to begin with.
Yeah, and the point is, when the French came, they opened up schools.
Yes, yeah. A lot of many of the people who came as missionaries ended up starting schools. The actual first schooling system that can be considered as actual proper schooling that goes beyond just teaching people how to read and write and recite the Quran. And they did do a lot of good in that.
Like physics, chemistry, biology, and all those things. All the fields.
Yeah, to some extent. I mean, considering the level of education that you could give to people at that stage and in that environment, yeah, I think it's a much better leap. But what I was talking about at the beginning of this in India has to do with the infrastructure, basically. So something like I don't know, the East Indian company that has a really bad reputation as being a way that Britain exploited India, did actually a lot of work to improve the infrastructure in India, and a lot of the institutions that were started in India came from that era. I'm not saying that they had India's best interest at heart, but at the same
Well,
time,
in the case of Syria and making schools, what's in it for France? What's in it for France?
I don't think anybody does anything out of the goodness of their heart.
Is
Purely,
it for indoctrination?
it's possible because many of these places also had a religious overtone. They were not they were not like foreign aid that was being sent to another country helping them get out of their situation. It was that framed in a religious framing. I think religion did play a role there.
Okay, so let's get to the point of this live stream. So we're talking about free will, what it is. First of all, people skip that part.
Well, because it's
do we have it?
Yeah.
What?
Because it's really problematic talking about the nature of free will for several reasons. The first reason being that when you're looking at your own experience of how you do things, you definitely get the impression that you're the master of what you're doing. And compared to, say, a tree that can move in the wind, looking at that and seeing how you might be behaving and making decisions and doing things differently, that gives that different impression that there's something separate that's happening there. And this connects with the other part, which is the really problematic part, that portrays free will as a kind of some magical power that's inside humans, that's special to humans, or if you want to expand this to some higher animals, that is capable of acting despite physical law, that can violate physical law.
Is that the religious conception of free will?
That's the religious / historical conception that people have developed, and it carried over into philosophy. And many of
but they don't say it that way, right? What do you mean by defy the laws of physics? I'm pretty sure they don't say it that way. So
no, they do exactly say it that way.
That's weird.
Well, here's the thing about this kind of free will. That's the idea that you are separate from nature as a kind of
which goes along with the concept of a soul that leaves your body and still exists.
Yeah. But because it's not being governed by the rest of the physical law, and you have this dichotomy between your corporeal existence and your spiritual existence. And so the self, which also connects with free will, the self is going to be this kind of ethereal presence that exists independent of the physical reality.
So let's start sort of from the beginning of why I thought to do this topic. So I didn't know how important this is for people. But after doing a podcast with Britt Hartley of No Nonsense Spirituality, she helped me see that people care about this a lot, and a couple of issues. There's people who I'm going to use my words here, my interpretation. They adopt the view that free will doesn't exist because somebody else did that is famous and is a specialist in some field, and then they're depressed about what they see as the fact that they don't have free will. It's really weird. I wonder if the connection between believing there's no free will and then being depressed about it, I wonder if that can only happen if you're just believing what someone else said without coming and arriving at the conclusion yourself with your own reasoning.
I think that's a little bit problematic, but I think if we want to say who actually falls under this category, I'm not sure it's actually as wide as it might appear at the beginning. Because if you're saying that there are people who are following certain famous people, be it scientists or philosophers, who say that just because of the general impression that you get, and then you end up being depressed because of it, it obviously means that there's a kind of a conflict between what you believe internally or through your history, culturally, with that newfound knowledge that you have incorporated into your worldview.
Well, somebody that doesn't follow the pattern I just said, I'm pretty sure Sam Harris arrived. He says there's no free will. Pretty sure he arrived at that, using his own reasoning, even if somebody else also had it. I'm pretty sure because he can argue it himself. It's not like he needs to call someone else.
Well, here's the problem with this. It's not about reasoning about it. Let's think about the following situation. When I see some pronouncement that is made by scientists about whatever phenomenon, I'm going to tend to take their word for it, not because I have necessarily examined this, but because I know that scientific progress hasn't reached the point it has reached without a sound method that can be tested. If I have the time and the ability to go and test their claims, I would be able to make that determination. So there are so many things that we do take without really a lot of examination and incorporate in our worldview from science because of its being pronounced by people that have that kind of authority.
But when they're doing that on science issues, and let's be specific, what kind of stuff? Let's say something in physics. Generally, when that's happening, there's only one view. There's no opposing view. Am I right? Like, let's say we're talking about Einstein and general relativity or something, and let's say it's not now, but let's say go back 100 years. And, somebody that doesn't know a lot about physics is going to say, okay, fine, Einstein's account of gravity, whatever. I don't understand it really, but that's the truth. That was the only view.
No, not necessarily.
Made any sense.
Well, it did take a lot of time, and it wasn't until you had some actual verification, measurable verification, that
that's when you got to the point. We're talking about the context where a bunch of people are believing something, and I'm saying it's because there was only the one thing. If you're talking about when they weren't sure whether it's Newton or Einstein, people weren't doing that yet. They were just believing Newton still. That's the old theory.
Well, these are very... So something like free will is not that it has multiple views. It's that we have a poor understanding of the underlying phenomena, which is basically consciousness and how the human brain develops consciousness and relates to the world. And so you end up with various points of view, and yet you can look at certain aspects of experimental science that has to do with the brain that point to a direction that shows you that.
But let me clarify my point further.
Okay.
So there's and I'm going to pick on atheists here, because religious people have their own view about free will. It's in their book, whatever.
Okay.
There's people who think, okay, if I become an atheist, and then because they happen to know what some atheists say about free will, they're like, now I have to believe there's no free will. But they're ignoring a basic point that there are atheists who are also famous and philosophers who say there is free will. So they're not even actually looking at that possibility. They're acting like there's only one possibility.
Yeah, and we have to also remember that when you're delving with into something that's related to free will, you don't necessarily have to think about this from a religious point of view, even though historically religion did frame a lot of that discussion. When you're talking about this from a philosophical and scientific point of view, you have so many tools that could generate people who are religious, who believe in free will, people who are religious that don't believe in free will, and you have the combination. Yeah. So, for example,
religious and no free will. How does that work? What
well,
religion says that?
Well, if you go to Islam, one of the biggest arguments that you had at the beginning is because the Quran itself says conflicting things about free will. At one point, it gives the impression that God is controlling everything, and then at some other point, it gives you the impression that you're able to do whatever you want. And so people actually thought about this, and right now you have different currents that emphasize different aspects of what the Quran was really saying.
So I never really got to the point of why I started this. So people that become atheists, and then if they adopt the view that there's no free will, and then if they get depressed by that, now they have an incentive to adopt another religion or go back to the same old one, just so they can feel better about having free will again.
Well, I'm not sure that there is a kind of a direct correlation between atheism and the lack of free will, because here's the thing. Consider what many religious people say about the prospects of leaving religion. They would say, we can start from someone like Dostoevsky, for example, who was talking about whatever, if you have no God, then everything becomes permitted. So that's the basis for morality that is supposed to have come from religion.
It's like saying if you become an atheist, you automatically get free will, and you didn't have free will when you were in a religion.
Yeah, you become completely liberated from all restraints to do whatever you want. That religion was the thing that created the basis for morality, and that according to that, once you become an atheist, there's absolutely nothing that's preventing you from anything, whether good or bad.
So let's get into the thick of it now. We mentioned right at the beginning, we implied that there's different conceptions of free will. And they all just happen to have the same name because they're all trying to address the same question. But they're answering it in different ways. So one standard way is the one you said, which from a religious concept, which is kind of like we can do anything, even, and we're defying the laws of nature. It's not even to do with the laws of nature. Yeah, that's nonsense. And that version of free will we don't have. But that doesn't mean we don't have a version of free will that makes sense. So one that would make sense is the one that doesn't break any laws of physics. That's pretty simple. And that means you have to factor in all kinds of things like, when I make a decision, or like, for example, why do we talk about physics sometimes, you and me? Or why did you go into physics? Part of it is going to be, well, you were interested in physics kind of early in your life. And then the next question to ask is, well, why were you interested in that? Well, you go back far enough, and it's not like you were making decisions. Like, I didn't make a decision that I knew is going to lead me to liking physics. I didn't know that. That was all accidents in my life. Accidents in the sense that I didn't plan it. I didn't make a decision to become this way. And then, of course, there's tons of it that was even before I was born.
Yeah.
Being raised in the U.S., I'm sure had a big factor. If I was raised in Syria, born and raised in Syria, and let's say I had a worse family than the one I have, like it's not very liberal, very authoritarian, maybe I wouldn't have liked physics at all, and I would be what they call a Bible thumper, but the other version of it, the Islamic version. Is there a name like that?
Yeah. I mean, who knows? Yeah.
Yeah, I don't know. I can't predict. It's not much different than, like I had this kind of conversation a lot in my life. I got married and had kids. The whole scenario was bad. But and then people try to sort of defend it, or I guess maybe they're trying to make me feel better by saying, well, you would have been a different person. You wouldn't be the person you are today if you didn't have kids. Yeah, there's a lot of truth to that. There's a lot of things maybe I wouldn't have sought after if I didn't have kids. But who knows? Maybe I could be somebody way better than I am today in different ways. I think overall, having kids made me better. I guess I could argue that. That's a big, long story by itself. Maybe let's not get into that. Figuring out how to raise kids is so much harder than something like figuring out how to be a good business manager. There's a lot of similarities, but the kid one is way harder. Just by the basic fact of, they're born, they can't speak. That's much harder than dealing with an employee,
Yeah. So when you look at a person at a given point in their life, you have so many different things that would have led to that point, and you have so many different possible scenarios that it's like you just explained. It's near impossible, if not actually impossible in practice, to predict what could have happened if you had some other situation to change things. And that I think that causes a lot of people to get that wrong impression of the sense of agency. It's because you have this very complicated thicket of causes and effects that cause so many different things. They have so many interdependencies. One thing causes another. And at the end of it, when you take the whole thing apart, if you're able in principle to do that, you're not going to find anything magical. And that's the thing that I was trying to point out at the beginning. It's that people think that they have that sense of agency as something that transcends the factors that you have around you, that you had when you re-examine your decisions. You usually frame it, you could have done otherwise, and that's why you were held accountable for this or that thing that you have done. Not really. I don't think that this is the case. It's a very simplistic point of view to think that you do have another scenario, but you actually, when you're looking at the causes that led you to this, it's really impossible to think how things would have been otherwise.
But a good point to mention here is, for the people that think that everything we've said here leads to no free will, the basic point is we can change ourselves. We are a program and the programmer. My mind is a program, and I am the programmer of this program. There's no other being that we know of that has that feature.
Well,
until ChatGPT does it in a few years.
Well, let me weave in Daniel Dennett's point of view on this, because he has a kind of a unique way of defining free will that many people say you're not talking about free will anymore. But he tried.
I would say that's probably just a semantics confusion over a word.
Yeah, but at the end of the day, I don't think we have much of a disagreement. Actually, most of the people who talk about free will don't have much of a disagreement about the fact that you don't have that magical thing that people have.
So they use the word compatibilism.
Yeah, so Daniel Dennett is one such person. He is a compatibilist. He definitely believes in determinism. But what's more, he doesn't say that we have free will in spite of determinism, but rather it's because of determinism.
So, okay, let's get on to that now. And let me preface this little part with, I had a conversation with ChatGPT. Mm-hmm. The purpose was to see if it can reason. it picked the topic of free will to discuss it. And it kept saying repeatedly after I would contradict it that something like, we don't have free will because the universe is deterministic. And then I would contradict that by saying, I don't know much about physics, but isn't there an area in physics where it's indeterministic? And he said yes and explained it. And then later again, he would say again, no free will because determinism. But dude, you just said it's indeterministic.
Well,
so what's the problem here? What's the fucking...
Let me actually bring in what Sapolsky says about this. Many people, when they want to invoke science in this, they include physics. But the actual discipline that needs to be considered here is biology rather than physics. Physics is of course there. We're talking about basic laws that govern everything. We're not special materials. We're just the same atoms and systems that exist in nature. But the thing that actually is relevant here is determinism that comes through biology and not through physics. If you want to think about this as different layers of knowledge or of organizing phenomena and thinking about emergent phenomena at different levels, you can talk about chemistry, for example. Chemistry is physics, but when you want to talk about chemistry, you don't have to invoke physics at every step of the way. You can come up with rules that are going to govern all these systems without any reference to
emergent properties that don't necessarily share any properties of the lower properties.
Well, they're based on it. Everything is based eventually on physics, and biology is based on physics and on chemistry. It's just that when you want to think about those systems that are complicated enough, like us or any higher animals, you're not really considering the physics level of this, because it's not going to be informative. You're not going to...
Even if you talk about the biology and you talk about the biology of the brain, that is going to come down to physics. And actually, I remember reading somewhere that they're finding, or theorizing at least, that there's quantum mechanics stuff happening in your brain, meaning indeterministic.
Yeah, I mean, Roger Penrose with what's the guy called Hameroff, they proposed that you can have some entanglement taking place in certain structures of the neurons. It's a little bit of a stretch.
And here's another point to mention. We don't even know jack shit about the brain very much. Like, we know 1% of what's happening. So
yeah.
Even if what you're saying is right, in the 1% that we know, there's the 90% we don't know jack shit about. So then hinging your idea of free will on very flawed physics, chemistry, and biology makes no sense.
Well, here's the thing. We know that you can reduce a lot of things that you do to higher level causes that are not really related to physics directly. You can talk about genetics. You can talk about...
Let's talk about genetics real quick. One thing at a time. Genetics. A lot of... Okay, and I guess this probably heavily influences people's conception of free will. A lot of people think we're very much controlled by our genes. They even think things like how smart you are is your genes. Genes. It's always fucking genes. If you look at any psychology paper and they mention whether something is hereditary, they always insinuate genetically hereditary. But if you look deeper and you look at some of the ones that actually explicitly say it, they're not saying genetically hereditary. They're just saying hereditary. Well, memes are hereditary. And so the point is, doesn't have to be genes that are causing the heritable trait to transfer to the next generation.
Well, yeah, and I can also add something more to it. For example, having a certain gene that controls a certain trait is not necessarily meaning that you have that trait, because eventually genes have to be activated. They have to be producing the particular proteins or enzymes that are going to control a specific process. So having the gene itself is not something that gives you a one-to-one correspondence between cause and effect. So that's not the level of causality that can talk about determinism. But once you put all these aspects together, you really have no room for something additional beyond what you have in that picture. That's basically what this.
So this is a good connection to these other things we talk about. These same kind of people that have these views that we've been talking about would also say, if you're indoctrinated, that's going to heavily influence your path going forward. And I think they would further say, control you, determine the outcome. So like, for example, if you're brainwashed enough, you'll never get out of the brainwashing. You will die brainwashed. They're seeing it as someone programmed you, and now you cannot edit that program.
Oh no, you can. This has nothing to do with it. But notice what's actually going to motivate you to do it. It's the same kind of thing that could prevent you from trying to re-examine your situation. That kind of feedback loop that you would end up getting into, thinking that, I don't have the ability to do that, and therefore I'm not going to be trying even to attempt to modify it.
And that's a self-fulfilling prophecy.
Yeah.
Which says nothing about free will.
Yeah. And so if you have enough motivation, you are going to be getting into it and trying to actively change things. But this boils down to motivation. And the motivation that you would have is going to depend on so many different factors inside you. But that magical aspect of volition that, okay, I have decided I'm going to be changing myself, that's not one.
Yeah. It's ridiculous. But again, you what you're doing there is refuting the extreme dumb version of free will, rather than trying to refute the best version of free will that doesn't contradict any laws of physics or chemistry or biology or anything else. And I get what you mean by it's actually kind of reducing the sphere of what free will is talking about. It used to talk about like kind of everything, do anything. We're saying no. Here's another way to say it too. When I've told my kids before the thing that you can change yourself, if you say that plainly, some people think that I'm saying you can change yourself to anything you want instantly. That's fucking magical. That's not what I'm saying at all.
But remember that the basis for this whole thing, this magical aspect, is something that has accompanied humans for centuries.
It's an easy thing to even mistake from the plain words I said of you can change yourself.
Yeah.
Like, I'm going to be Superman. So tomorrow, Superman's magical. So let's say I want to be exactly like Einstein tomorrow, or I'm going to live Einstein's life, or I'm going to make every decision Einstein made.
No, but that's still assuming that you might have the brain or the ability, the physical ability to do it. Let's think about something else. Let's think about a drug addict that wants to get out of the situation he's in. So getting that kind of reinforcement could eventually lead you to take the reins of your situation and eventually get out of it. But without that motivation, without that basis, you won't be able to do it. And you might be in a situation that causes you to think, well, my genes caused that, my environment caused that, my upbringing caused that, I'm not going to be able to get out of it. So it is a kind of a mindset eventually that could generate that internal motivation that causes you to go out and make the change. But that change is not going to be a kind of a magical thing that you willed into.
Right. You can only the only way you can change is, first of all, it's within the means of your current knowledge. Okay.
Knowledge and psychological makeup.
Because I would count that in knowledge.
No, because I think that there's a big difference between the two. Because if we just try to reduce what's happening inside us to some rational
no, knowledge includes all your intuition.
Yeah, because there's a lot there's a lot of things that you cannot actually even describe as rational that motivate and cause us to act in certain ways.
Yeah, and I still call that knowledge, by the way.
For example, suppose that someone wants to go commit a crime, and they know that they're going to be punished if they got caught. Having that knowledge within their psyche, within their body of knowledge, is usually not going to prevent them from actually doing it. They already know that this is going to cause.
And again, I'm when I say knowledge, I'm including your entire subconscious, which in some ways our subconscious is stronger than our explicit knowledge.
Yes, absolutely.
It knows more.
Yeah, and that's the one of the problems that people have when it comes to free will, is that there is so much happening under the hood, below the surface, that you are not actually aware of. So that at the end, when you're making that decision, that subconscious is part of you. But
that's like you're saying the person is only seeing himself as the conscious part, and he's saying, well, since my subconscious is doing shit I don't know about, that's why I, the conscious part, don't have free will. But you are the whole thing, the subconscious and the conscious.
Yes.
And whether or not you have free will is that whole encapsulated thing.
But the sense of self that people have usually excludes the subconscious, because you don't have access to it. And so
we don't have easy access to it.
When there's a decision that's being made, when there's even a thought that comes to your mind, you don't even know where the thought comes from. Try to trace. Absolutely, it comes from inside.
I used to say the heart and the gut too, right?
Yeah.
I think it's still your mind, and yeah, you might feel shit down there, but that's just confusing you about where stuff is.
Yeah. In fact, in ancient texts, including the Quran, you're supposed to be thinking with your heart.
Yeah.
And Muslims, there are Muslims until this very day who say that science one day is going to refute the idea that the brain is the place where thoughts are, and you're going to see that it's the heart, really.
I don't, I learned very early. I don't know how I got this conception, so simple conception, that various things that you do is a result of certain organs that do it.
Mm-hmm.
So the mind, that's the brain. The soul, I always ask people, so which organ?
Yeah.
Which organ is doing that? And they don't answer. They can't answer. There isn't an answer. And actually, the concept of the soul says there's no organ. It's explicitly saying it's not part of the body.
Well, some people might counter that. You go to Descartes, and he would say that the pineal gland in the brain is supposed to be the interface between that ideal.
But that's just semantics, because I would say, so you mean a part of the mind?
Well, for him,
it's a piece of software your brain is running, and you're saying part of it is soul, part of it we call mind, but that's just one fucking thing.
Yeah, but a dualist like Descartes wouldn't consider that.
What's dualist?
The fact that you have a mind and a body that are separate, that interact somehow, and it's really hard to come up with a scheme where you actually have them interface properly. If this is one nature and this is one nature, what's actually the interface? Is it going to be a mix of?
Yeah, I kind of see why people try to separate mind and soul. I think it's a bad conception. It's the mind, and yes, they are integrated. And yeah, it's hard to integrate, but you can, and we do.
That I think, for the most part, in my discourse, in my speech, I usually avoid using the word soul to begin with.
Oh yeah, I only say it if other people fucking say it.
Yeah,
not arguing about it. Yeah,
because it really doesn't serve any kind of practical purpose. I mean,
I just use the mind.
It's only mind, and mind is a function of the brain, and
I'm not even stuck to the word mind. I can use other words. Is the point?
Yeah.
You have to be able to explain these things in using different words. By the way, if you have a sentence and you can't replace a word with another word, then you don't know what that sentence says.
Yeah.
So instead of mind, I can say software. That's another description you can give. I don't have to say the mind. And if somebody wants to say soul, I'll just ask that basic question. Well, tell me which organ is running the soul. And if he says a part of the brain is doing it, then that's just the mind. And
Right.
and if you want to go further and say what's the division between the soul and the mind, it's like they're saying there's no integration, like you said. We can explain various integrations we do between the conscious and subconscious.
And you have to remember that this whole idea of the soul, if you go back to the beginning of how the current Judeo-Christian culture started thinking about these things, in Judaism you don't have any of that stuff, and even in Christianity you don't really have it. It's only when you have that mix between Platonism and Christianity that you start seeing some of these things, basically some stuff that appeared in the Hellenistic era but didn't really exist before that. And so even though religious people today would defend the idea of the soul as if it's something that's integral to many of these doctrines, it's really hard to come up with something that corresponds to it in those texts. But at the same time, when it comes to talking about an idea of the free will, about the self, you need to have something that's eventually going to be held accountable by God, and that thing cannot be the body. It cannot be that mix of what you're seeing right now. It has to be something separate. And so they come up with the idea of the soul. That's the thing that
it's convenient, and you really need the idea for an afterlife.
Yeah, absolutely.
Because without an afterlife, without a soul, you can't have an afterlife.
Yeah.
I want to mention something else. I learned this. I didn't read any of Harris's books, but I talked to a lot of people that argue his ideas. And I think you confirmed this too, that his motivation for arguing that there's no free will is so that the people that do believe in free will and also believe in punishment will reject punishment. Am I saying that right?
It's not rejecting punishment, but it's reframing why we might put someone in jail, for example. We're not going to be putting someone in jail.
Okay, I want to get into that detail with you, but I want to first preface and just say I'm somebody that doesn't believe in punishment and I believe in free will. So like I don't really need or have this problem that Harris is trying to solve.
Well, I think probably the naming and the implementation is important to what people consider to be punishment, because one of the wrong implications that people get out of something like what Harris says is that remove free will and you have that chaos where people are not going to be held accountable for whatever they do. That's
I'm guessing he still believes in jail.
Yeah, and that's the whole idea.
Yeah, and I don't believe in punishment, but I believe in jail.
Yeah,
it's for defense and reformation.
Exactly.
Not for let's give him some pain so we can feel good in our revenge feelings.
Exactly. That's the whole point. So jail or whatever punishment that you call punishment is not supposed to be for retribution or revenge or anything of that sort. If you have someone who's dangerous and you're not able to ensure that society is going to be safe in their presence, locking them up is one way to deal with it. But if you're able to rehabilitate that person and then have them back live in society, I'm not seeing why they
yeah. And I believe, well, because I believe in free will, everyone can be reformed.
Well,
and I don't mean from the outside. Yeah, I mean maybe they need help from the outside, but it has to start from them. They have to want it.
Then if it's free will, why did they get into that situation in the first place? Why is it that you're now needing some kind of rehabilitation?
You're just going to make me go explain all the shit that led to his life. Yeah, it's going to be stuff before he was born. It's going to be his shitty upbringing. It's going to be a butterfly effect. You know the movie The Butterfly Effect? It's going to be a billion decisions that led to that. Any other one decision that could have been different could have led to something else.
And that's why I would personally not use that label free will in order to talk about that. That person needs rehabilitation, period. That person might need some readjustment in their brain chemistry. That person might have a brain tumor that, when removed, they're going to stop acting like the homicidal maniac that they are, for example. And there are documented cases that that show that. So I personally think that if you're able to get to the point where science advances enough, then it's possible to address all these things that we call.
It seems like you're saying that. I guess I'll use the word free will, but I could just use the word agency too. Some people have more agency than others.
Some people are less encumbered by situations that cause other people to be compelled to behave in other ways.
Yeah, and I think that's the same as what I said. It's like saying, if you have a really cozy, nice scenario most of your life, you have a lot of agency. If you were treated harshly your whole life, you don't have very many options that whole time. You develop coping mechanisms to deal with abuse. And let's say at this point, let's say you have this belief that therapy is bad, which a lot of people do, it's in our society, Yeah, it's going to be very hard for you to change. And in that scenario, it is as if you don't have free will. This reminds me of something I just said today. I think it was today. A Muslim said in the ex-Muslim subreddit something like, no Muslim that actually learned Islam and was faithful and would become an ex-Muslim. And I replied, okay, let me translate that. If you're brainwashed enough, you can't get unbrainwashed. And yeah, the more brainwashed you are, the less agency you have. Yes, but I don't believe it's zero. There's no zero. If you're alive, you can make change that could lead you out of it. Now, it won't be magically quick. It may take you 10 years of working at it, including therapy the whole time. Well, not the whole time, but you have to work up to even wanting therapy and getting therapy.
Well, that position that this person said is very often countered by saying you have two categories of people who really, really know religion. You have either the people who become those really fanatic people that might turn into extremists, or you have people who completely leave the religion because they realize what it is. So knowing Islam that deeply doesn't really necessarily turn you into a true.
And I didn't say maybe he said it that way, knowing Islam. The way I said it was brainwashed enough, which isn't really about facts about Islam. It's like the fear that was put into you, the guilt that was put into you, which doesn't necessarily have to have much information in that.
Yeah, but what they usually say, from my experience in debates of that sort, is that the argument that they try to present is that if you know enough about Islam, if you really internalize what it says, then you end up generating internally that fear of hell, that a desire to obey the commandments of Allah, and so on. So they do make a connection between knowledge and those implications.
I have a tweet. It's not really a tweet. What is this? This is an interview by David Deutsch where he's answering the question about free will. I'd like to put it on the screen now.
Okay.
And I hate that. Wait, what is shit? I did the wrong thing here. Hold on. What the fuck? Okay. I need a better one. We can't see much of this. Let me get rid of our faces more.
Yeah.
Maybe that. So I don't know who the interviewer is. You disagree with the notion made popular by Stephen Hawking and others that free will is in fact a sort of illusion. Can you talk about that? Yes. So this is David Deutsch. Yes, this is the idea that because we are all made of atoms, and atoms are subject to laws of motion that don't allow any wiggle room. Therefore, everything we do also doesn't allow any wiggle room. And therefore, our free will must be an illusion. Now, I think that's called reductionism, and it's simply a mistake. It's sort of assuming that the laws of physics are a kind of person. They're a kind of supernatural being that makes us do things, but it's not true. The laws of physics are simply a description of what we do. It's not the laws of physics that make atoms move around. Laws of physics are simply a description of what they do. The thing about what we see about the world is that there are levels of description. There are descriptions at the atomic level, and descriptions at the molecular level, and the biological level. And then there are descriptions and explanations at the level of human thought. There's no reason to expect that just because there's a low-level description, there isn't also a high-level explanation and description. In the book, his book, The Beginning of Infinity, I give some arguments, both due to me and due to people like Douglas Hofstadter, that the high-level description is sometimes the only reasonable explanation of what is happening. So, for example, if you play a game of chess against a computer, then it's not the silicon, which is atoms, that has beaten you. It's the program. The program in the computer, and that program is an abstraction. The program doesn't consist of atoms. The program is an abstraction over the atoms, just like human thought is an abstraction over our atoms. It is the programs that have beaten you. When I make a decision, it is I who have made it, not my atoms and not the laws of physics. So the interviewer asks a follow-up question. So we get really unnecessarily and detrimentally hung up on this sense that we can get to the absolute foundation of anything. So David Deutsch replies, that's true as well. The idea that there's an absolute foundation is a formula for stagnation in science and for tyranny in politics and so on. There will never be an absolute foundation for knowledge because there will always be the question, once we have got a particular fundamental theory, of why it is that way and not some other way. Was that helpful, do you think?
I think the first part of this is basically what I said at the beginning, that when you're talking about determinism, you're not going to be looking at the level of atoms, you're going to be looking at a higher level.
Yeah, when you were talking about emergent properties.
Yeah, what I disagree about here is that when you're considering each level, you're not actually completely disconnecting it from the level before it. So I wouldn't go to absolute reductionism, which is basically going to say you made a decision this morning to eat this and not that because of atoms or because of the Big Bang that through atoms eventually led to that. This
Big Bang caused it.
Yeah.
You might as well go that far back.
Yeah, that would be a kind of an absolute ridiculous reductionism. At the same time, when you're talking about the level of biology and the level of chemistry, and above that, the level of thought, you do have connections between them. So it's not that they're completely emergent properties.
I don't think he was saying that. I think you're arguing against a straw man. One thing I remember reading about in his book relating to emergent properties, and also I learned this in physics directly. I remember, I still have my physics notebooks, and I remember reading on a page emergent property, and I don't remember what it is now, but maybe it's something like, how boiling works, boiling water, and what's happening on a very macro scale, and what's happening on the atomic level. What's happening on that high level can't be described in terms of what's happening in the low level. Did I say that right? Because maybe I'm contradicting myself now even.
Well,
how does boiling work? I can explain by atoms.
Well, there's one aspect that usually is mentioned as an emergent property in connection with water, which is wetness. When you're looking at the molecular composition of water, you have no way of coming up with the idea of wetness as something that comes up from the molecular or atomic level. You
Say
have
more about that. So what's wetness? What do we mean here?
yeah. So when you're talking about something that is wet, we can talk about how the hydrogenic bonds that cause the water to act in that kind of fluid way instead of having the atoms being separate. But the quality of wetness as something that you would experience at the macroscopic level is not something that you can derive directly from the molecules.
Right.
And so that's an emergent property that comes up at a level that's much higher than just looking at the molecule.
And to be clear, there is a connection between the emergent property and the lower stuff, but they're so different from each other, which is why they call them emergent properties. There's properties at this level that those properties don't exist at the lower level.
They don't exist, but they, like I said, for the case of wetness, you can understand that in terms of the chemistry that has to do with how the molecules are going to be interacting with one another. You have certain polarity that exists between the molecules, and that causes structures to be formed. But the actual wetness as something that you can describe is not something that you can go to just a quantum mechanical description of what those water molecules are doing and then come up with, well, it's going to be acting in that particular way at the macroscopic level.
Yeah, and I guess a lot of people have trouble with this, people that don't study physics, I guess. They kind of envision this idea that when we're doing physics or learning physics, that we're being taught like all physics to the point that when we're in the outside world now, we're not in school anymore, and we see some physical phenomenon, and for us to explain it, they think we heard it in school. No, we make it up on the fly based on physics principles we learned in school. They didn't present us with all the phenomenon that we know of.
Yeah,
they presented us with maybe 10% of it.
One of the biggest misconception about what science is that they equate the science with scientific knowledge, when in fact what you're actually learning are tools that you can implement in certain situations to actually deal with that particular situation. That kind of critical approach to different situations is what science is, and not the scientific knowledge that results from it. I mean, that's definitely part of the what we call science, but that's not the main thing that we mean when we consider science.
Science is methods, not end conclusions that we have right now. Yeah. Even the methods get better over time.
Yeah. Yes, absolutely.
It's not, we didn't find the best scientific method yet. You know what I mean? Like, we keep coming up with better stuff. So as a tiny example for people to know what we're talking about, we were doing the scientific method in physics before it was called physics 400 years ago. But before they started applying this scientific method to medicine and humans, before that, we didn't have the concept of placebo, and we didn't have a way of ruling out placebo. But we've since invented a method for that. It is like you could say, an add-on for the scientific method that you need to have if you're dealing with humans.
Yeah.
I don't really have any more, and the people that wanted to come on are not in the comments. I wonder if I should be communicating better, like telling them, come in the comments and let us know that you're here. But they didn't do that, so they're not here. Let's go. We're an hour in, by the way. Let's go ahead and do some. Let me go through some of these banners. I don't know what we're doing next week yet. We still have to decide.
I mean, we still haven't talked about why people convert to Islam in as a phenomenon.
Yeah, that one. We could do that, but I got to coordinate that with one of our guests. So we don't know yet, guys. Let's do some housekeeping. I have some interesting things to show here. First, the praise. Somebody said, "Love the work that you guys are doing. Keep doing it. people need to know the forces they're dealing with in relation to Islam. Somebody replied to that person with a link, and I think they put that link multiple times. I started listening to it, and almost the very first sentence that had any input, any content in it, read like this: there is an ocean of evidence that proves blah, blah, blah. And I've written about this before, so I wrote again. I said, this is a statement about epistemology, and it's wrong. Epistemology is the study of knowledge. It answers like questions like, how do we know what we know? And I go on to say, a single piece of evidence contradicting X, let's say a theory X, would refute X regardless of the ocean of evidence that is supporting it. So, like, think of a murder case. If there's 100 pieces of evidence and 99 support the theory that this guy committed a murder, but there's one piece of evidence that contradicts it, I don't know if people know this, but we go with the one piece of evidence contradicting it. All the evidence has to agree, which means that all the evidence that it's supporting has no role. It's not doing anything. And actually, it's very easy to have a logical piece of evidence, which is just this. Let's say there's 100 pieces of evidence supporting the theory that this guy committed murder. All you need is another theory that also agrees with that same evidence, and that's enough to get him off. And that's just a logical reasoning. It's not even a empirical evidence. What else do I say here? And then I invited him to come onto the live stream to.
I think many of these people have this idea that if you have this overwhelming preponderance of what is proposed as evidence, that this is going to overwhelm you, and that's it. Because
they actually think science works that way.
Here's the thing: when you're looking at the way that the Quran proposes that you find God, it actually starts with arguments that might appear on the face of it as an invitation to do some scientific research. Look at the world, look at the phenomena in the world, try to investigate it. Don't you see God, and so on. So it tries to give you the implication of this, and it tries to guide you into the reasoning that what you're seeing is actually evidence for this, and throws in every once in a while a kind of a sentence. Well, if you don't actually believe that, then probably you didn't use your brain, or you use your mind, or whatever it is that we might have for Quranic vocabulary.
And that's I don't know if this is what you're saying, or if this was in there, but part of the point here is Islam makes claims about epistemology.
Yeah.
It makes claims about how we know what we know.
Yeah.
And all of its claims are wrong about this, which is why I encourage people to learn epistemology, because it's helping you investigate the foundation that Islam is built on. The foundation that Islam is built on is incorrect epistemology. There's a few more slides here. So this next one and the next few slides is the same guy. I don't really want to talk about him or even the discussion. So he's trolling me, and I call him out for trolling me, and I do my anti-trolling method. And the moment I did that, the next morning I looked, and this video stopped getting impressions. It was getting a ton before that, a ton. I'm looking at this curve going, whoo, and then straight line, no more impressions. Maybe I've gotten like 5 since then. So YouTube doesn't like my anti-trolling method. So I'm going to stop doing it on YouTube. I'll do something else. I don't know what.
Did YouTube at any point make any direct contact, especially with that sentence that you have?
No. Yeah, I wrote here. So he was being a dick to me, okay? So I said, "Did your mother not teach you manners?" And he was offended. How low can you go? Not enough, I think, but hey, you do you. I said, it's a good question to ask someone who's being a jerk. Not good if it's on YouTube and you want more views.
Oh well, yeah, but also it's not only that. Sometimes engaging people of that sort is just a waste of time.
It depends on what your goal is. You only know if it's a waste of time if it's not meeting your goals. Depends on what your goals are.
Right. So for me, if I have a few exchanges and it seems that this person is really determined not to be reasonable to actually engage in any way other than what they're doing right now, I would prefer to just completely.
Oh, so what part of my anti-trolling method is to turn them to my side.
Oh no, I understand, and this is definitely something.
And part of it is I'm trying to improve my methods.
Yeah,
that's part of my goal.
Well, obviously, YouTube is not too happy.
Well, that's what I just learned now. Yeah, I mean, and I wonder how much this happened before, and I didn't notice it. Then he defends his mother or something, and I said, "So you're saying your mom taught you right, but you instead defy your mother's teachings by choosing to be a jerk?" But yeah, I'm not going to be doing this anymore. I don't. I'm going to. Oh, and by the way, after this point, I invited him to our live stream. I kind of knew he was going to say no, and he did say no. He instead directed me to some other Dawa guys.
Oh.
And then and this was so interesting. The reason I was talking to him, part of why I was talking to him was, at one point he said he's commenting on my channel because he thinks that people that go there, it's gonna push them to Islam, and so he's helping the YouTube algorithms by commenting on my thing to get people. So then at the end of all this, when he said no, I don't want to come in your live stream, I said, "Oh, so you're not gonna help people come to Islam?" And then he didn't reply. So
well, people have a really weird misconception about what would cause others to make a really big decision like joining a religion. It really underestimates what people really are.
I was just so surprised that he had that. I mean, I never heard of that from anyone before. That ex-Muslims criticizing Islam would lead people to Islam. Like, that makes us.
No, this is something that we hear very often. In fact, it's kind of usually a declaration that a Muslim would make in our groups. They would say something like, listening to you has reinforced my belief in my religion. It's something to that effect. Now, it obviously indicates that there's something internal that's happening, which is probably not exactly what they're saying.
Yeah. He's telling himself, convincing himself almost.
Right. Yeah. So there is something to it. But at the same time, while they are actually having this kind of experience of feeling some discomfort for what they're reading, at the end of the day, there are indications, there are studies that would tell you that sometimes if you're trying to change someone's ideas by countering them, you might actually have that backfire and they get more entrenched in those ideas.
Yes. Although, I mean, the way we're doing things, we're I don't think we would have that problem. We're not like, what's the way to say it? We're not asking anyone to believe what we say just because we said it.
Yeah.
That's it. Which is a lot of what other people are doing. Even lots of atheists. And if not in their main field, definitely in other fields, you know, where we're trying to do it in no field at all. I don't want anyone to believe something just because we said it. Use your own brain. I'm not responsible. That's another way to look at it. If you guys enjoyed this, like, subscribe, and share. If you want to suggest topics or call in, we got a couple links in the description. And we have a Discord. People, you can either come talk to me or just come talk and, you know, have a community with that for people that lost theirs, people that don't have a community. And I got nothing else. Do you want to talk about anything else, Osama?
I think it was a really nice discussion. It's definitely not exhaustive, so I can imagine revisiting this at some other point. Whether
when we get some new angle that we realize we didn't talk about, sure.
Yeah, whether revisiting it as such, but also we could also have some other aspects that touch on it that would require us to
or connect it to other topics we haven't already connected it to.
Yeah.
And by the way, Britt Hartley expressed that she would like to be on the live stream too. We might talk about free will with her a little bit during that episode.
That would be great.
Yeah. All right, let's go ahead and end it here. And Osama, stay on for a couple minutes.
Mm-hmm.
Bye, everyone.
Okay, goodbye.